Kia ora koutou, and thank you all for joining us today for this webinar to introduce the draft 2025 practice note. We're going to hear from Elise Freeman from Parallaxx, who we've been working with for over 5 years now. Elise worked with a group of volunteers from Surveyors Spatial to prepare the first version of the practice note, which has been well received, but due to, industry changes, is due for a refresh. I'd just like to acknowledge the working group who are involved in the earlier stage, as well as Consulting Surveyors New Zealand, Land Information New Zealand, and Surveyors Spatial New Zealand for their contributions as funding partners. Before I introduce Elise, I'd just like to note that the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce the draft practice note and to call for feedback before it's compiled and finalised. Surveyors Spatial will send a follow-up email with the presentation slides and the recording, as well as instructions on how you can provide input following today. Given there are more than 350 people registered today, we anticipate it might take some time to get through responses, so just be patient as the team work through it. And also, due to the number of registrations, we're unable to open up for live discussion today. But Jenny at Surveyors Spatial has set up Slido, so you can ask questions as we go in the Q&A section within Slido. Elise will go through the questions at the end of each topic, and we'll also make some time at the end to answer the top unanswered questions. So please upvote the questions you want answered. And if we do run out of time to get through them all, the team will follow up on any unanswered questions afterwards. I'm going to hand over to Elise, who will run us through the new risk-based approach to traffic management. This approach is intended to make it easier for surveyors to work in the road corridor and also keep our people safe. The generic diagrams have been adapted to be more user-friendly and also hopefully easier to implement as well. I'll hand over now to Elise to introduce herself and get into it. Thanks, Elise.
Cool, thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to be in front of you all today and to update this really important piece of work for the industry. I have behind the scenes with me that you can't see, I've got Jolena and Bayer. They will be keeping an eye on the questions that are coming through, and what I will try and do is answer like topic-specific questions as they come through, and any general ones I'll leave to the very end. They also played a key part in updating this draft, so I wanted to acknowledge both of them here today. Even though I was the original author, a lot of the mahi for the update has been done by these two ladies. So thanks for being with me in the room today. So really important that we have the opportunity to update and keep these types of documentation up to date and live and kind of keeping up with industry change. And there has been a lot, as Nick mentioned. We've been at this for the last 5 years now, with the previous iteration coming out in 2022, so now being 2025, it's great to have a refresh. This type of documentation really enables industries like surveying to work more safely and more efficiently on the network without kind of being confined to those compliance type, prescriptive type rules that we've seen in the past. So this is us aligning even further to the New Zealand Guide for Temporary Traffic Management. And I guess just one piece of kind of speaking point that I'll talk to is, I'll call it the guide. So if ever you hear me talk to the guide, I'm talking about the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management. It's just a bit of a mouthful to say, so I'll just shorten it to the guide. Right, so I guess the goal of the webinar is for us to help you understand the changes, what has changed, what hasn't changed with the document, and how you can start applying these principles in your day-to-day practices. And of course, that call for feedback as well is really important. So before I jump into the actual changes that we've made, I thought it would be important to kind of show you a little bit of the roadmap on where we're at with the industry and how things have changed over the past couple of years. So even right off to the left-hand side of your screen, we're not even on the timeline. That was when the original Surveyors Spatial New Zealand practice note was created in 2022. Then the official release of the guide came out in April in 2023. So very much pioneering the way for practice notes. So I'm always very proud to be part of that with the surveyors. And then November 2024, we saw the CoPTTM warrants. So those NZTA warrants that we knew, TC, STMS, Inspector, they got switched off. So that system, that warrant system, got switched off. And I am going to talk a little bit later about training and competency and the changes, because I know it's a bit of a hot topic at the moment. So those got switched off, meaning anyone that was holding the qualification, that's fine. You could hold the qualification for as long as it was valid, which is 3 years. And then the expectation is that you take a different route in your training and competency, which is what I'll speak on later. July this year, the Minister of Transport released a statement to our local councils requiring them to submit a plan by 20th of December this year to show what their transition is going to be in terms of risk-based or in receiving risk-based applications, traffic management plans. So they have been given a deadline now to work to, which is a positive thing, especially for the likes of surveyors, and recognition for this type of work and recognition of a practice note on the network. So they need to have a plan in place by 20th of December this year. And then any new contracts will need to be transitioned into a risk-based approach by July next year, with then all other outstanding contracts and works completely transitioned by the 1st of July 2027. So that's a bit of a stepped roadmap for our local councils to transition into the risk-based approach. That is typically where we've had our most struggle in terms of getting these types of TMPs over the line and approved, because they are still very decentralized in their thinking and their approach to a risk-based approach. So they have different sets of rules, different risk appetites, and so not one size fits all when we're trying to submit an application like a surveying TMP to a local RCA. So we should hopefully start to see a little bit more alignment. We know that they are trying to align with NZTA, which brings me to the 1st of September 2025, which was when NZTA decided to centralize all TMP review and approvals into one centralized hub called the RTTMC. So previously, applications that came through and got applied for on state highway network went to the different NOC regions, so the different network outcome contracts that are owned throughout the network, throughout the country. Each of those regions had their own TMC that was in charge for approving TMPs on that piece of state highway network. That is all now centralized into one hub run out of Smales Farm, ATOC, Smales Farm in Auckland. So you should see a lot more consistency, one approach to the way that TMPs get reviewed. And I do really recommend you reaching out to them and touching base with them if you do interact with the state highway quite often, because there is a form that you can submit called an EAR, that is an early access request. It essentially asks you to give the RTTMC some context in what you want to do and how you want to access the state highway. And they will come back to you with the expectations on whether or not you need a car application, whether or not you need a TMP application, or whether or not you just need a time and space booking, for example. So that's a really positive step change, especially for low risk, low impact type work. There is a little bit more streamline happening now, and our local RCAs are starting to follow suit. So the way that NZTA has set up their review and approval system, it is starting to sound like our local RCAs will follow in, meaning we'll get a lot more consistency throughout the country than what we've seen previously. And as I mentioned, a lot of the local councils, which obviously includes Auckland Transport, they have said that they will be looking at accepting risk-based applications, and specifically for Auckland Transport, they're wanting to have only risk-based applications from June, July next year onwards, which is really positive for folks like us. All right, so then jumping into, I'll just check if we've got anything for, well, cool, thanks for the questions so far. I'll answer training ones at the end. So 4 main parts that we're going to run through today. We're going to go through the alignment to the guide. Part 2, we'll look at the update and road classifications because there's a bit of a step change there for you to understand. Part 3 is just jumping into some of the changes around the new generic diagrams we've created. And part 4 is, of course, the discussion of training and competency. So really quickly, what didn't change? So what didn't change is the scope of activities. So it's still very much focused on your surveying, the low impact, those short duration activities that do not change the normal operating condition of the road in a way that really impacts the way that the network operates. The target audience, obviously, the continued transition from CoPTTM to the guide. So we have retained some of the words. You'll see maybe some words that were CoPTTM based. We haven't completely thrown those out. It's okay to still use them. CoPTTM is still there as a guide. It's just not the rule book, if you like. So we can still reference CoPTTM. It's just not something we have to comply with anymore, if you like to think of it like that. So that's the key things that have stayed the same. So the baseline of the document remains the same. Nothing too much that has changed there. But what we have done is align it more to the principles of the New Zealand guide, with the key outcome being that all TTM must be developed through a risk-based approach. So that's kind of the biggest shift under the guide, is the RCAs are now going to call for us to show our working and show how we are going to keep people safe on the network and how we are going to keep their network operating and the road users safe as well. That's their 2 key duties, is their RCA is, integrity of the network, keeping their road users safe. So that's vulnerable road users as well as the motorists. And of course, then there's the approvals part where it comes to approving traffic control devices, etc. So instead of us just looking at a simple layout and trying to fit inside of a box, it actually forces us to stop and think and have a look at the conditions that we're operating in and choose a more appropriate set of controls for the work that we're doing and where we're working. So we focus on context more than prescription. It does give the likes of surveyors more flexibility to ensure that you are feeling safe in where you're working and how you're working, rather than trying to be compliant. So it's probably one key thing that you'll see with this draft is it might almost feel a little bit more stripped back, and you might think, oh, there's nothing on this diagram whatsoever. And it's like that for a reason. And we've got additional documents given to you to help you choose what to apply in that certain scenario. So we don't want to prescribe a control to you. We want you to choose the correct one, depending on where you're standing and how that environment is feeling around you at that time on that day, because we can't decide that for you. Right. One very small piece of housekeeping is that the original one was called a best practice guide. That's not how we should term these. It should be a good practice guide. So very, very minor little tweak there, but it's just making sure that we understand that there is no one best practice to doing risk-based TTM or to working safely. It is a good practice. It is what good looks like. And so just making a small change there to make sure that we all are talking the same language. So back in 2022, even though I was pretty fresh to the idea of a risk assessment, we did still go through and risk assess the type of activity that you do in different environments. And that is how we built the original set of plans. So it was based on risk principles. However, we've learned a lot about certain control measures and their failure modes, what goes wrong when they fail, for example, and we've adjusted our diagrams and our risk assessment to suit that. So what you'll see is a much more in-depth and refined risk assessment framework in the document. I really recommend you go through and read it if you can. It should be fairly straightforward and stepped through. It follows ISO 31000 risk management guidelines. It's important that we align with that. That's mentioned in the guide. So we want to make sure that we're aligning with the guide, and it's a lot clearer. And I think the structure is going to be a lot easier for you to follow in terms of identifying and then assessing and managing your risks on site. So it just kind of like strengthens our approach to how you operate on the network. So I hope you'll find that really helpful. One of the biggest changes I feel we are all going to need to wrap our heads around, and this might take a little bit of training internally and a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with, and that is the road classifications. The old classifications, you can still use them and refer to them. However, it is good if we do try to start aligning more to the road classifications that have come out now. So I will do my best to explain this. So previously, and what the original practice note was built on, was this framework called the One Network Road Classification. And that was cool, that's fine. We had kind of urban and rural environments. We split the diagrams into kind of urban, local, and arterial, high speed and low speed. And then we had our rural environments, high speed and low speed as well. The thing with the ONRC is that it really looks at just the roads by their function with the type of vehicle that uses it. So it kind of looks at, you know, what is the type of vehicle that is operating on that road, where is it going to, and what's its function? Is it a private vehicle? Is it freight? And that's kind of the only type of information that it was capturing and looking at. So contrast that with 2025, and we are moving into what's called the ONF, the One Network Framework, which considers both the type of vehicle moving on the road and its purpose, as well as kind of more of the surroundings and what else is going on and what else the road reserve is being used for. So it expands that classification a lot more into both movement and place considerations instead of just the movement piece, which is what we were looking at previously. So to dive a little bit deeper in that, just side by side, so you can see the original focus was mainly the movement of vehicles and what the key kind of destination was, what the main route was, contrasting that with the ONF, which is very much looking at more of a holistic, higher level kind of approach to what's happening within the road reserve, who else is using the network, what's happening along the sidelines, especially where you and us as surveyors will be working on those boundary areas, what's happening there and what do we need to consider in those spaces. So think of the ONF as like an upgrade to the One Network Road Classification. It's kind of like building on it. There was that baseline that we considered, and then this is building on top of that with further considerations around what might happen in the sidelines. Hope that makes sense. There are some tools that are now coming out to further help us transition into these new road classifications. So there are these lovely diagrams and pictograms that you can go and have a look at. We will send all of the links out after this webinar with the Q&As, the slides, and a whole bunch of links to different tools, because what's important for you to understand is you are going to need to familiarize yourselves with these classifications in order to stop and think on site and think, what type of classification or road classification am I working on today? And what are the key considerations that I need to take into account? And therefore, what type of control or no control will I be applying? So I think you'll see that on the next slide with an excerpt from the practice note. So for example, on that right-hand side, we've kind of broken it down for you in terms of the classification and what the key movement role is for that classification, what the place role is for that classification. So what's happening around the sidelines of that road classification, and therefore what some of your considerations should be on site. So before you leave your office, for example, you can go, I know that I'm typically going to be working in city hubs today. So I am thinking that there's going to be a high level of pedestrians, a mixture of vulnerable road users that I might need to consider. What's the type of equipment that I need to take out with me in order to be well prepared to be dynamic on site with controlling those changing conditions in a city hub environment. So this is the type of mindset we want you to have, instead of picking up a diagram going, I'm on a high-speed road, I'm on a rural high-speed road, therefore my diagram is X. That was the old approach. And so this is, as I said, it is a lot more flexible for you. It does put the ownership on correct decision-making back on you, but I hope that you'll find it a lot more flexible and dynamic and enabling of your work, rather than trying to be compliant with something that's not fitting you correctly. Some of the other tools that we will send out that you can start having a play with are these interactive maps. So a lot of the councils, the local councils, are starting to release them for their areas, and it just means that you can navigate to them. Often you can right click on the road that you'll be working on, and it will come up with a bit of a classification breakdown for you. So if you're not entirely sure what road classification you'll be working on, you can always do a quick navigation search, and we will send out these links for you. Sorry, not all regions. If you're in some smaller regions, not all of the smaller regions are quite up to date yet. Obviously, the main cities and the main hubs are. Please be patient. They'll be working on it. It'll come out in time. NZTA is definitely working on it as well. And I know Auckland Transport's done a really great tool. So we will send all of those links out so you can go and have a play with what information you can get for your region. Okay, so the new, does it replace mobile roads? Yes, it will replace mobile roads. Mobile roads still has some really critical information in it for now, and I wouldn't completely throw mobile roads out, but mobile roads does still refer to certain things like level 1, for example. However, if you're looking for road widths, etc., there is still some very helpful information from mobile roads. But the idea is that we transition into these new maps, these new GIS kind of maps that are more up to date, and they've got better data flowing into them as well. And they do stay up to date faster than mobile roads. Mobile roads is a very manual process to update, so it's not always that accurate. Yep. Okay. So for the new diagrams, the new generic diagrams, just wanted to run through some of the work that we've done there. We haven't removed any diagrams per se, but what we have done is reviewed them and consolidated them. And also there's been a bunch of new diagrams added because people found themselves working in environments and they couldn't quite find any guidance around how to work in that environment. So actually, thanks to Nick's team, we had a session with them and they said, here's a bunch of environments that we've found ourselves working in and we're a little bit confused about how we should work in them. So that's been really valuable and we've added those in. So those are now all incorporated. If you navigate to, I think it's section 8 and section 10 in the practice note, it will give you a breakdown on what the previous diagram was and then what the updated diagram and consolidation has happened. So here is an example on your screen of what the previous diagrams looked like, and those very prescriptive kind of sectioning out of a non-arterial. It was a category A, so that was a low speed, or a category B, which was like a high speed rural, low volume, level 1, level 2. It was quite convoluted, really, when you think about it, having to go through and try and decide where you're working and which diagram to choose. So contrast that with the updates now, and it's really focused on what you're doing. So what the diagrams show is the type of activity that you are doing. And then once you go out into the environment into those road classifications, it's up to you to decide what controls, and we've given you guidance on what those controls could be. So instead of splitting them up into environmental considerations, we're really focusing on the activity that you're doing and where you're working. And then once you get to site, we're obviously encouraging you to do like a dynamic risk assessment on site, and we've got templates for you to help you kind of incorporate that. If you've already got paperwork, brilliant. I know a lot of you work on your tablets. We've got some guidance there that you might just want to update some of that, some of your on-site records that you fill out. And we've grouped those working scenarios in terms of activity rather than environment. So I hope that makes sense. When a TMP is required, this is probably another key piece of, I guess, information and update and reminder for you. So I mentioned before when a TMP needs to be approved, or when one of the key responsibilities of an RCA is, and that is that they've got the delegated authority to approve traffic control devices. So if you have cones, signs, barriers, etc., that you want to use in a temporary way on the network, you need RCA approval for that. Now, there are diagrams in your practice note that have none of those things. So if you are not impacting the live lane, you're not changing the normal operating condition of the road, you've parked like a general, member of the public in an area that is expected to have a vehicle parked, and you are not impacting vulnerable road users, you are not digging a hole in the footpath, and you are, on a back berm, and you don't have any signage, no cones, you do not need to approve, or you do not need to apply for a TMP. We've done some work recently with some local councils on this. We know that that is NZTA's standpoint. So we've been trying to work with local councils on whether or not that is their shared view. And I can confirm that Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch also share that view. Wellington and Christchurch do still want to know where you have been. And so there is still a scheduling requirement there, which I'm hoping will also drop away. So we've still got a little bit of work to do in terms of our local councils and notifying them when we're accessing the network. But in terms of requiring a TMP, those are those times where you do not require a TMP, which is really, really good for us to get to that point now, where if we can still access the network and undertake our work, as long as we're complying with those bullet points that you can see on the screen, you actually do not need to apply for a TMP, which is fantastic. There is one key reminder, though, that a few things have popped up over the last little while in relation to some excavations that have possibly been happening under the practice note. And I want to remind you that if you are going to excavate a piece of the carriageway and you're going to break the seal, that will trigger the need for a car application. So that's a corridor access request. It is essentially an RCA's warranty system for their asset. So if you are going to be kind of impacting their asset, or you're going to degrade their asset, they want to know about it because they want to make sure that it gets reinstated to, up to quality again. Otherwise, water can come into the pavement and it, can create potholes, etc. So just a reminder that if you are actually going to break the concrete of the footpath to uncover a survey mark, or you're having to do the same in the carriageway and actually break the pavement to uncover a survey mark, a car application is going to need to be applied for, and you would most likely be then requested to submit a TMP with that as well, because the likelihood is that, yes, you are going to be impacting the network at that point. So that is when you do and do not require a TMP. Now, you might choose to put these diagrams in as a PARS, which is called, it's the new term for a generic TMP. Excellent. So if you're in the berm, just answering a question live, this was one piece that we were kind of going back and forth with the RCAs, and we were like, okay, we get breaking pavement totally needs to be reinstated up to a quality standard. What if we're just talking about, you know, a couple of spadefulls in the berm just to unearth, you know, grass is kind of growing over? They were like, we don't want to know about it. No car application required, because it's not really impacting their asset and the quality of their asset. So thank you for that question. No need as long as you, you know, reinstate it, make it tidy, put your grass seed back in. They're happy as with that. Great question, thank you. This guidance on when you do and do not need TMP is also reiterated in the practice note. So that guidance is in there for you. So in section 8, this is the section that will step you through. It is the guide to show you which TMD might be required when you submit your traffic management plan, and a step-by-step on how to use the practice note. There is also a dynamic risk assessment form there for you. This is one that you can just take and incorporate into the paperwork that you might already have and that you might already be using. It's by no means supposed to be another piece of paper that you carry around with you. Take the principles from it, incorporate it into your everyday use for when you're out in the field, or if you don't have something, use the one that we've provided for you. It is just a guidance. It's something to ensure that you're undertaking those final checks on site before commencing work. The other thing that we have provided to you, similar to what we did last time, is a pre-filled form. It's an editable Word document, and we'll provide you with the PDF as well, so you can download and use it. The forms have been pre-signed by us for Survey and Spatial New Zealand, and you are able to use them as you like. Just be aware that if there's any major modifications to the material, to the diagrams, they will likely not be approved because it will not align with the practice note anymore. So just make sure that you jump in, give me an email, just consult with me if you are trying to create your own TMP and submit a TMP yourself. Otherwise, of course, we're happy to help you get that sorted and get that submitted on your behalf. So just check in with me if there's any major changes. Like I said before, consultation with the RCAs is going to be your best bet before you even submit your TMP. Reach out to them, get their understanding on where they're at in terms of their transition to a risk-based approach. It's going to make your application a lot smoother than trying to assume what they want. Another question at the end, can you please clarify if digging up a mark isn't included as excavation? So the clarification around digging up a mark is if it's in the back berm, for example, and you're just digging up a mark and you're not impacting vulnerable road users, that's the footpath or a cycle lane, and you can contain yourself to the back berm, you're not changing the normal operating condition of the road by the way, maybe the manner that your vehicle is parked or anything like that, you won't be requiring a TMP or a car application. So the excavation piece is really linked to a corridor access request. There are two key pieces of documentation. Either a non-excavation application would just have a traffic management plan to show how you're working on the network. If you are excavating the network, you have to have a traffic management plan and a corridor access request, because the corridor access request is the RCA's warranty to hold you liable to reinstate the road back to the condition that it was when you started. So that's that piece of paper for them to say and hold you liable at the end. So we've checked it out. And I mean, as long as you're not digging a huge hole, we're talking about we're unearthing a survey mark, right? So a couple of spadefuls and then you reinstate that. They don't want to know about it. That's fine. It's only when you start to really impact the network or when you start to impact their asset is when they want to know about it. I hope that helps.
Another question. Mm-hmm. Does the new road classification system mean that we get to decide what type of road it is?
I would need a little more context around decide what type of road it is.
Like probably Probably the ONF.
Okay, and section 10.5 does not appear to be in the practice note. We'll check that out.
Yep.
And we'll send all the updated documents at the end of this. Thanks for that. Deciding what the network is, I would be careful with that. Obviously, you've got the operating speed to consider. You've got how many lanes there are. You've got the typical type of vehicles. This is all information that it's included on those tools that you can access. So if you cannot access that because maybe you're in a region that is not up to date yet, I would still default back to the old system and comply with the old system. Don't go making things up yourself and assuming things. Always go and look for the data rather than assuming what the network is. I hope that helps. Okay. I think we're tracking pretty well. Training and competency. Hot topic, I know. It's been an absolute evolution for all of you and what you've had to go through to get your qualifications to work out on the network and work under a TMP. So I will break this down. And it's an ever-changing landscape at the moment. This is still very much not over, the evolution of our training and competency model for industry. But what I can tell you so far is you have kind of 3 key pathways in terms of how your people are trained and become competent. The first one is internal training. So this is where you are responsible as a PCBU to ensure that all of your staff, all of your workers are trained, instructed, and supervised to undertake the work that they are doing. Now, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. The delivery model is that you, as the PCBU, would need to deliver that for your people internally. Maybe you've got a learning and development section of the organization that can do that for you, and you've got the resource, you've got the know-how and the competence to be able to deliver that for your staff. And you are responsible for holding the evidence. So say something happens on site, for example, WorkSafe comes and investigates and they ask for your training and competency records to ensure that that person was deemed competent to go and work on the network and work under a traffic management plan, for example. You would need to produce that evidence and you would need to be able to stand by that to say that we believe that we have done to the best of our ability. We have trained, supervised, and instructed our staff to do their jobs. Now, there's one catch with that, and that is possibly if you work for tier 1, potentially, there could be contractual requirements that see an industry skill standard or a unit standard backed by NZQA in your training and competency. So there could be minimum contract requirements that means that you can't just do internal training. You actually need to go and get a unit standard. So there are 2 key avenues at the moment in terms of obtaining a unit standard. And the one that we are looking at for you is unit standard 40231. So that's applying control measures to a low risk, low impact activity within the road reserve. It was taken from the old inspector warrant, if you like, and it kind of looks and feels quite similar to that. But there is a little bit more work involved in terms of giving evidence. So if you decide to follow the Connexus micro-credential pathway and you apply through Connexus, through the online learning portal, it's going to be very much self-directed learning. So you will get signed up, you'll get a login, you go in, you do your e-learning online, and you submit your evidence. So the verification that is required for that, you have to collect evidence, which then gets verified by a workplace verifier. They have to be a technical expert. They also need to be skilled and experienced in the actual task that they are verifying you against, which is not always available inside of your organizations. So that's kind of the first hurdle that you have to get over if you're going to take connects this kind of self-directed learning pathway. It's obviously recognized as an industry standard and is often required by tier 1 contracts as evidence of competency in staff. The other pathway that you can do is you can go through what's called a PTE. So that's a private training establishment. They deliver the same unit standard, except essentially they kind of manage you through the process. So they kind of hold your hand and guide you through the process. So you also do some e-learning, but there is more material that is attached to that. There's a little bit more visual aid, for example. They will help you through your logbook. They will be your verifiers, for example. There are, a total of 18 hours that you need to submit in terms of evidence that you've worked on low risk, low impact environments. But they help you through and guide you through all of that. Then you will sit on a workshop and they will do the final assessment with you on the day, very similar to how we completed the inspector workshop. But there's some work logbook requirements there. If you're unable to get your logbooks completed, there is a little bit of a workaround there that the WDC has approved. If you think you might need to go down that route because maybe you've had extended leave or you're not employed currently, so you can't actually submit a logbook, there are some alternatives that you can do to provide evidence. So if you want a little bit more information about going via a PTE, reach out. I can kind of put you in touch with people that can help you out in that space. So those are currently our 3 core pathways that we've got to get you trained and competent. Obviously, if you still hold the inspector warrant because maybe you got it right at the end of 2024, you've still got that for 3 years, that's fine. You can still operate under that, no problem. The RCAs are not going to turn you away for not having qualifications. It is up to you as PCBU, or it's up to your employer to make sure that you have the right training in order to do your job. So yeah, I know that there's a couple of questions on this. So let me just divert my attention over here.
Yeah, so the first question was how important it is that the surveying companies as PCBUs undertake micro-credential on TTM risk assessment level 4. How would that training work in with the practice note?
That level 4 risk assessment, so to undertake a risk assessment, I don't think is appropriate for you as inspectors. It is very much geared towards people that are creating traffic management plans and creating risk assessments for temporary traffic management plans that are a lot more involved than what you are doing in terms of your inspection. That is what we have done for you in this practice note. You will really struggle to get through the assessment because it requires you to do a full TMP, submit it, show that you're working with the RCAs, you're doing your 3Cs. It is very much above and beyond what you need to be doing as an inspector. This unit standard, this micro-credential is where you are best set.
Next question is, how long are the micro-credential valid? Do you have to refresh every...
Once you've got it, you've got it. And so it's back to the PCBU again to validate that your staff is still trained and competent. So you can either reach out to a training establishment to do that for you on whatever you feel is appropriate. Is it a yearly cycle? Is it a return to work toolbox type session at the start of the year that you want to do? That is going to be up to you. But in terms of unit standards, it's no different to when you achieved them at school. Once you've got them, they're on your record of learning for life.
Yeah. One more question is there any plan for having this practice note approved as generic traffic management plans by the RCA? Could this process be coordinated through a local branch rather than each survey firm seeking individual approval?
Possibly. For the NZTA network, that's a lot easier to do now. I would say it's a lot easier to do even if you wanted to get it for yourself for a private firm. I would need to check out what the requirements are, because with the new forms and the new submissions that we do, the PCBU, so the person applying for that traffic management plan, puts themselves down as the risk reviewer. So they are named on the document now to say, I agree with this set of controls, and this is how I'm going to go out to do my work. Take it as like an SOP, a standard operating procedure for how your workers are going to work on the network. That's essentially what we're doing with this practice note. And if you are going to be in a scenario where you're going to use one of the diagrams that's got a sign on it, or you are going to have to deploy some cones, that's when you're going to need to apply for a TMP. So up until that point, you can use it as an SOP and you don't need to apply for a TMP. But as soon as you start to break into those areas where a TMP is required, I would still recommend that you, as the private entity, that you hold your own set, because then you've got it on record that you have reviewed and agreed with the controls and the way that you're going to operate in the certain region that you're going to operate in. But there could be, the idea is that you refer to this as your SOP for the times where a TMP is not required. So you still kind of get that cover. Yeah, hope that makes sense.
Another question is it mentioned in the practice note that searching for survey marks in the berm is not generally an excavation?
I don't think that's mentioned, no. We can pop that in. As I said, this is the draft. So absolutely, if you've got some feedback like that and you want it a little bit explicit and you want it acknowledged in the practice note, by all means, we can make those kinds of notes. Yep.
Another one is, does the low risk, low impact training allow surveyors to place TMDs, cones, etc. for a setup and shoulder as shown in the plans layouts, or is there a gap in the training that survey firms will need to cover?
That is a really good point. I think it would be prudent that maybe some training on placement of devices could be required. I would need to do a deep dive onto all of the verification levels that sit under that micro credential. So whether or not there are any evidence required of traffic control device placement. That's a really good question. I will note it down to make sure I reply in the FAQs when I send out the email after this.
Another question is, what recognition is there for 20 years of experience working on the roads in New Zealand? Surely the unit standards assessment should consider experience?
Yep. You can always go ahead and try and apply for recognition of prior learning or recognition of prior experience, which means you don't need to go through the micro-credential that could get given to you. So you can by all means get in touch with Connexus and put forward your evidence of that, and they may award you with that unit standard.
Next question is, can you talk more about the process that replaces GTMPs?
Mm-hmm.
I think you said PARs.
Yep.
Will this function much like the current system where if you are operating under it, you do not have to apply for a TMP each time you deploy it? Just notify through my worksites or similar.
Yes, that is bang on. So I'm trying to remember the full acronym. It is something like around the reusable schemes. So that's the R and the S, reusable schemes. So really it's pre-approved reusable schemes. There you go. So it's very much similar to the generics. They just didn't want to call it generic because they didn't want people taking a generic approach to creating them. So they wanted a more thoughtful process in the front end of creating these schemes, these TMPs, and then you can apply for them depending on if they are risk-based, for example, you will automatically get your 12-month approval. If you are still submitting CoPTTM-based PARs or generics, you are going to start to see your approval window dwindle. So I know that already Auckland Transport, for example, are only approving generics for like 6 months now. They're not giving you a 12-month approval because you're going to run over into their goal next year of having everyone risk-based. So yes, it works the same. And depending on what network you're on, you may have to retrospectively tell the RCA where you've been by logging your network access. I know that some areas require you to do that. I hope that answers your question.
The next one is, to clarify, we can use your TMP application form as long as we accept your risk assessment, controls, plan, layouts, etc.
Yeah, beautiful. That's one. Yep. So put all those together, you put your name on it, you'll see there's a section there saying whoever is going to approve the risk, and that's going to be the piece for you. We've created it. We're all in agreement that this is how we want to work and that we feel safe and that these are the right controls. And then you submit that and you get that approved. Okay. This is the very end anyway, and I know I just answered general questions there. I'm just going to double check if there's any other general questions popping through.
Oh, we just got
one more. Can we use these?
NZ surveying TMDs 2025 to apply for generic TMPs with different RCAs?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. We have been using them. We've used the previous version over the last 3 years submitting, and we've got very good at understanding the nuances of different local RCAs and what they will and won't approve. And that's why it's important that I mentioned that they are being asked to switch to the risk-based approach at the end of the year, or at least have a plan in place. So we should hopefully start to see a mindset shift in those local councils towards understanding what we're doing here, because once again, you guys are kind of ahead of your time. So you were ahead of your time in 2022, and we were really pushing those RCAs along to understand we don't put tar seal down on roads. Therefore, we don't want to comply with the code. Let us work in a way that we know is safe to work on the network. And this is just like the more mature version of that same message. And the RCAs are now starting to catch up with us. So I am feeling very confident that we should have a lot more gravitas with this new round.
One more?
Yep.
How do we get a generic for a whole area without having to name every street?
That's pretty standard. Yep, that's pretty standard. We don't need to name every street. It's called like a global application. And we say we're going to work here. And so that's part of the detail in the traffic management plan will show in the different environments. These are the different ways that we're going to work. Here are our work activities. This is how the road classifications, how we're going to work with the different road classifications. That's all detailed in those diagrams, which I'll flick this documentation here. So in the pro forma, it kind of lays all of that information out for the RCA. You don't have to get down to the nitty-gritty detail because you don't always know where you're going to work and where that particular mark is going to be. So we can't give that level of detail to the RCA. All we can say is, here is our safe operating procedure, essentially, on how we're going to work on the network. We've got 6 minutes, so I'm just going to check if there's any other general questions. I hope if I haven't answered it, hit it again and Nick will fire it through to me. Nothing coming through. Okay, great. Well, I hope that's been really helpful. I'll see if Nick wants to pop back up on the screen. If you want, you can scan that QR code that's on your screen now. That'll put my details into your phone. And you are more than welcome to give me a call. We will send out all of the information post-webinar with the recording, those tools, the most up-to-date PDF, and we're just here to help you guys out with the transition once again.
Cool. Sorry, there was one more question before I wrap up.
As a surveyor who just completed the micro-credential workshop last week, I have highly recommended as a risk assessment training tool and to understand how to get out of the CoPTTM mindset and into a risk-based plan.
Nice. Okay, cool. And I'm curious to know whether or not that was the low risk, low impact micro-credential or the risk TTM. I don't know if you can reply to that, whomever that was, but good to hear that it was really helpful for you. And it is a bit of a mindset shift. It's taken a minute to not default. It's very hard to get out of those biases. So it's good to hear that that you found it helpful. Great.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks heaps, Elise and the team. in the background there for coming along today and shedding some light on this. I guess this project came about just to try and help us to help ourselves a little bit as surveyors out there. We know what we're doing generally. We've been in the environment quite a long time, but just the way in which we had to navigate the paperwork to do that was a frustration. So this is really all about keeping safe. But yeah, I guess hopefully avoiding the need for a mountain of paperwork. The key takeaway really for everyone hopefully is that with a bit of thinking we can avoid unnecessary and actually sometimes dangerous additional cones and signs and stuff that we don't actually need to do our job. So as Elise said, stop, have a think before you get out there and apply the controls that are needed to keep the team safe. Also, just that branch question that came up, the branch, I guess speaking as the Wellington branch chair, we can't actually apply on your behalf. You would need to apply as the PCBU, understand. So we can help with coordination. I think in Wellington we did send out some previously approved TMDs to branch members to help them on their traffic management journey. But the idea of this practice note and the work that Elise and the team have done is that it's applicable basically around the whole country. Every different council is slightly different in their approvals process. So if you do need help, I'm sure Elise and the team can offer to help you out. We've found them really helpful here. I guess finally, thanks also Tara and Jenny from Survey and Spatial for setting this up today, and also helping with the feedback process to come. Yeah, encourage everyone to have a look through the documents and links that we'll send out off the back of this. And if you do have any questions or comments, fire them through during the consultation period. We will basically have that open till the end of the month. So yeah, got a week and almost 2 weeks. So yeah, any other questions that come through, we'll get Elise and the team to answer them and put up on FAQs on the website. So that's, I think, concludes today. So thanks everyone again for tuning in, and hopefully we can get this finalised and up and running so that everyone can be safe and also avoid that pointless paperwork. So yeah, thanks team.
Thanks so much.